I stood in the doorway of the house I now legally owned, watching George, my mother's husband of 16 years, fold his arms like he still believed he ran the place. He looked at me with that tight, patronizing smile he always used when he wanted to mask his discomfort. But underneath it, I saw fear. The kind of fear a man feels when a lifetime of quiet little manipulations has finally run out of road. He said nothing at first. Just stared at the letter in his hand, the one from my attorney, explaining in concise legal language that the property had been purchased and transferred, and that, as the new owner, I was exercising my right to reclaim possession within a reasonable time frame. He looked up at me, face pale, voice trembling behind forced politeness. "I thought," he said, "we agreed we're all equal now." I almost laughed. Equal. That had been his favorite line every time he wanted to blur a boundary, dodge responsibility, or take credit for something he didn't earn. Equal, until equality inconvenienced him. "George," I said calmly, keeping my voice steady, "there was never anything equal about the way you treated me." He blinked rapidly, unable to speak. My mother stood behind him, wringing her hands like she always did when caught between truth and the man she convinced herself she needed. She looked older than her 68 years. Tired, fragile, but still loyal to him in that heartbreaking way some women cling to a man who gives them crumbs and calls it bread. "What are we supposed to do?" my mother whispered. "Where are we supposed to go?" It wasn't the question that stunned me. It was the fact that she asked it while looking at him, not at me. Even now, in the moment where I should have been the villain in her eyes, she sought his reaction first. His permission. His guidance. The irony? The very reason I bought the house was because he had spent years ensuring I felt unwelcome in it. I stepped farther into the foyer, letting my eyes sweep over the space I had known since childhood. The wallpaper was different, the furniture newer, but the tension in the air, the invisible lines of dominance and resentment, felt exactly the same. "I didn't force anything," I said softly. "You two put the house up for sale. I simply bought it." George swallowed, jaw shifting. "You only bought it so you could control us." "No, I thought. I bought it because you once looked me in the eyes and said something I never forgot, something that set this entire chain of events into motion, something that would come to define the line between who I had been and who I finally became. But I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I watched the man who had once smirked and told me, 'We're all equal now,' realize that equality meant accountability, and accountability was something he'd spent his whole life avoiding. The silence that fell between us was heavy, palpable, electric. And in that silence, I felt the first flicker of justice. A justice I had earned through documentation, patience, and truth. But this moment, the confrontation in the house I now owned, was only the ending. The real story began long before this day. It began the year my widowed mother remarried. And the year I learned that not every betrayal looks like a knife. Some betrayals smile at you across the dinner table. My name is Eleanor Hart, and at 62 years old, I have lived enough life to recognize patterns long before most people notice them. I was 50 when my mother married George, a man who walked into our lives wrapped in charm and confidence, two qualities that often disguise a third, entitlement. At the time, I wanted to believe she had found companionship after the lonely years following my father's death. She was 60, vibrant, hopeful, the most hopeful I'd seen her in years. When she introduced him to me, he was polite, warm, and overly eager to bond. I'd been around men long enough to understand that eagerness often hid something unspoken. Still, I tried. I truly did. I worked as a clinical librarian at the time, research, organization, documentation. My career taught me to see the value of quiet observation. And with George, it took only a few weeks to notice the small shifts in my mother. The slight hesitations before she answered questions, the quick glances toward him during conversations, the nervous smoothing of her blouse whenever he expressed even mild annoyance. He wasn't cruel. Not overtly. That was his talent. His control was applied like varnish, thin, glossy, difficult to detect unless you saw it in the right light. At first, he tried to charm me. Told me I was too independent for my own good. Told me women like me were formidable, in a way that sounded like a compliment until I realized it wasn't. He liked to say we were all equal now, that my mother wasn't beholden to the past, that I wasn't the authority anymore, and that he was not stepping into a father role, just a partner in a modern, egalitarian family. But equality was a tool for him. He used it to flatten boundaries that protected other people, while maintaining his own. One night, When my mother suggested I move back into the family home temporarily during a job transition, I heard him say quietly, too quietly for her to notice, "She needs to start living her own life. We're all equal now. She can't expect to lean on you forever." I wasn't leaning on anyone. I had savings, a pension, and independence he found threatening. That was the moment I realized he viewed me not as family, but competition. I said nothing. I simply moved into a small rental closer to my work, and I let the years unfold as they needed to. Now, at 62, I can see how every seemingly small comment, every subtle shift in my mother's behavior, every financial decision he guided her through, was leading to a betrayal I should have anticipated. But at the time, I still believed love, motherly love, would protect the relationship between us. I didn't know yet how wrong I was. And I didn't know that one day, the house that held my childhood memories would be weaponized against me. Or that I would one day take it back, not through rage, not through force, but through something far more powerful. The truth. My mother, Margaret, had always been the emotional center of our small family. When my father died, she held herself together with the quiet strength of someone who understood that grief must be carried, not conquered. She worked part-time as a school secretary, kept a tidy home, and poured her heart into creating a sense of stability for us. I adored her for it. But after their marriage, George became the gravitational force in her life. And everything, every conversation, every decision, every tradition, slowly bent toward him. Holidays changed first. For decades, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner. My home was spacious, meticulously kept, and I loved the ritual of preparing for people I loved. The first year after their marriage, my mother suggested they host instead. I agreed without hesitation. But the second year, George said, "We should rotate. It's only fair. We're all equal now." The third year, he said nothing. It was simply assumed they would host. I remember sitting at their table that year, watching my mother bustle around the kitchen, nervous to impress him, while George carved the turkey like a king receiving tribute. I felt like a guest in a home where I had once been a daughter. Birthdays shifted the same way. Instead of the long-standing tradition where I spent the morning with my mother, our quiet ritual of coffee, pastries, and talk, George insisted on planning joint experiences. I was included technically, but the intimacy was lost. Then came the financial blending. My mother, always practical, had kept her accounts separate after remarrying. But George convinced her that marriage means unity, and soon everything was merged. He called it equality. But equality shouldn't erase the security someone built before you entered their life. Still, I remained diplomatic, respectful, hopeful. I wanted harmony. I wasn't naive. I simply believed that as long as my mother and I were honest with each other, nothing could truly sever us. But the emotional divide grew quietly. One afternoon, while helping her reorganize old documents, I found her will. It was dated before George entered her life, leaving everything equally to me and her sister. When I gently asked whether she had updated it, she hesitated. "He thinks we should revise things. Make everything equal." There was that word again. I asked her what she wanted, and her answer unsettled me. "I don't know," she said softly. "Sometimes it's easier to agree with him. He gets frustrated when I question things." A red flag, yes. But she wasn't in danger, not the kind that requires intervention. She was in the kind of emotional arrangement many people enter without realizing the cost. The kind where keeping the peace requires giving up small pieces of oneself. And in her effort to maintain peace with him, she began sacrificing pieces of us, too. Still, the real fracture didn't come from family traditions or emotional shifts. It came from money, as it so often does. It began with a phone call. My mother's voice was trembling, brittle around the edges. "I need to talk to you, Eleanor. About something important. Something financial." I drove to the house within the hour. She was alone when I arrived. George was running errands, which meant she had 30 minutes of unfiltered honesty before he returned to manage the narrative. We sat at the kitchen table, once the heart of our family home, now cluttered with envelopes and forms she tried to hide even as she pretended everything was fine. "Your father," she said quietly, "left money for you. You know that?" "Yes. A modest inheritance, carefully invested, intended for my future. For emergencies. For stability." "What about it?" Her eyes filled with tears. "It's gone." At first I thought she meant misplaced or temporarily inaccessible. But the look on her face told me the truth before she spoke it. "George convinced me to use it for the house." My breath caught. "What house?" This one, she whispered. He said since we're all equal now, it didn't make sense to keep separate accounts. He said it was family money, and we should use it for improvements so we could increase the resale value someday. I felt the room tilt slightly. How much? I asked. All of it. The number echoed in my mind like a dropped glass shattering on tile. Years of my father's saving. Years of careful planning. Gone. When? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. A little at a time. Over the last few years. I didn't realize how much until I saw the statements. I didn't want you to be upset. Upset didn't begin to cover what I felt. But I stayed calm. Still. Focused. Then came the second blow. Eleanor, we put the house up for sale. I stared at her. Why? She twisted her hands together, knuckles white. Because George wants to move closer to his son. And the market is good. We can make a profit. And my inheritance is in this house, I said slowly. Which you plan to sell. She nodded, eyes full of shame. Before I could respond, I heard the door open. George walked in, his smile too wide, too bright. Ah, Eleanor, he said. You heard about the sale. Good. Now we're all on the same page. And remember, like I told your mother, what's hers is mine and what's mine is hers. We're all equal now. There it was again. His shield. His weapon. I looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment I understood something essential. He hadn't stolen my money. He had manipulated my mother into giving it to him. And now, he was about to profit from the sale of a house paid for partly with my father's legacy. He thought he could get away with it. He truly believed I would do nothing. But he didn't know me. Not yet. I didn't confront them that day. Rage is loud, but justice, real justice, is quiet, methodical, patient. I returned home, closed the door behind me, and sat at my desk. Years of research experience had taught me to trust paper trails. And this betrayal, steeped in financial manipulation, would leave one whether they realized it or not. I requested bank statements. I combed through old account transfers, cross-referenced dates, traced spending patterns. What I found was not surprising, but it was damning. Nearly every withdrawal from the inheritance account aligned with a home improvement project initiated by George. New roof, updated plumbing, landscaping, bathroom remodel, each framed as an investment for the family. But the account was in her name, which meant the withdrawals were hers, which meant the misuse was hers, which meant he was insulated. Unless I could prove influence, mismanagement, or financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. My mother wasn't incompetent, but she was emotionally dependent on him. And the law recognizes undue influence, not easily, but clearly when documented. I needed a lawyer. I found one. She was sharp, direct, and deeply familiar with cases involving elderly financial exploitation. I sat across from her, explaining everything. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her notebook. You have a case, she said. Not a criminal one, but a civil one with weight. But before we discuss litigation, let me ask, what outcome do you want? It was a simple question with a precise answer. I want fairness, I said. Fairness, she repeated. Not revenge. Fairness is the revenge, I said quietly. She smiled. Over the next several weeks, we gathered documentation. Financial records, email correspondence, home improvement invoices, appraisals, even text messages where George framed spending decisions as mutual agreements, when the accounts were not mutual at all. We also discovered something crucial. The house had been listed below market value to create a faster sale. George wanted out quickly. That urgency was a mistake. We'll buy it, my lawyer said. I blinked. We. You, she clarified. Through a trust. Quietly. Cleanly. Legally. And once you own it, you set the terms. I hadn't intended to buy the house. But as soon as she said it, I felt a shift inside me, an alignment, a clarity. The house was mine by history. My childhood. My father's legacy. My mother's misplaced trust. Buying it wasn't an act of possession. It was restoration. But we didn't rush. We documented everything, down to the smallest inconsistency. Paper trails don't lie. People do. When the sale closed, George was ecstatic. They moved quickly, boxing belongings, imagining their new life near his son. They had no idea who the buyer was. Not until the certified letter arrived. Not until my name appeared on the deed. Not until the truth finally turned to face them. The decision wasn't dramatic. It didn't erupt from fury or heartbreak. It settled into me quietly, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. It was time. Time to reclaim what had been taken. Time to show them that equality doesn't mean surrender. Time to restore the balance they had intentionally disrupted. When the sale officially closed, I waited a full day before sending the notice. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. I wanted to be centered, calm, unshakable. My lawyer drafted the letter. It was professional, concise, and irrefutably legal. It informed them of the new ownership and the timeline for vacating. It offered assistance for relocation, reasonable, generous even, because I felt no need to mimic George's manipulations. Justice doesn't require pettiness. When the letter arrived, they called me immediately. My mother sobbed. George shouted. I listened. Finally, I said, I'll meet you tomorrow. We'll talk in person. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because I was rehearsing the tone I wanted to hold. Firm, steady, compassionate where appropriate, unwavering where necessary. The next morning, I drove to the house. It stood exactly as it had for decades, but something felt different, like the air itself knew a shift was coming. I walked in without knocking. It was, after all, legally mine. George stood by the fireplace, posture rigid, eyes stormy. My mother hovered beside him, thin and trembling. You blindsided us, George said. This isn't how family behaves. And stealing from your wife's daughter is? I asked. He flinched, but recovered quickly. We're all equal now, Eleanor. What's hers is mine. You know that. No, I said evenly. What's hers was hers. What was mine. And what you did was take advantage of a woman who trusted you more than she should have. My mother began to cry. I sat beside her. Mom, I said softly, you weren't malicious. But you were misled. And I can't fix what's been spent. But I can reclaim the value of the house that my father's money helped build. George tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand. I'm not throwing you out tomorrow. You'll have time. But there will be boundaries. Real ones. Not the kind you dismissed with that line you love so much. He swallowed. What line? We're all equal now. The way he paled told me he understood exactly what I meant. For 16 years, he'd used that phrase to manipulate, diminish, and control. Now it stood as evidence of the arrogance that led to his downfall. I stood, smoothing my coat. This isn't revenge, George. This is restoration. And in that moment, I made a quiet vow. I would not raise my voice. I would not humiliate him. I would not behave as he had. I would simply hold him accountable. And accountability, I knew, would undo him more thoroughly than anger ever could. Downfalls rarely arrive with dramatic collapses. Most come quietly, piece by piece, erosion disguised as inconvenience. For George, it began with the phone calls. Insurance, utilities, property tax offices, all of them repeating the same phrase. We can only speak with the owner. His frustration grew with each call. He paced the living room, combed through old documents, tried to find leverage that no longer existed. Ownership had been his unspoken claim to authority. Without it, he felt untethered. My mother, meanwhile, shifted between confusion and dawning clarity. She asked questions, small ones at first, then larger, sharper ones. Why did you insist we use the inheritance? Why didn't you tell me we were underpricing the house? Why was everything always your idea? He snapped at her. She grew quiet. But the questions didn't stop. Their power dynamic had cracked. While they packed boxes, realtors called with updates about listings near his son. Prices were higher than he expected. Much higher. They wouldn't be able to buy without taking on a sizable loan. He blamed me. But the truth was simpler. He had spent money that never belonged to him. He had overestimated the sale profit. He had mismanaged everything. His downfall was self-made. Meanwhile, I remained steady, professional, unemotional in all correspondence. My lawyer delivered timelines. I offered moving assistance. I even recommended senior relocation services. Kindness, I discovered, is exquisitely uncomfortable for those who expect hostility. Weeks passed. My mother began staying with me some evenings, needing space from his temper. One night, she confessed something that broke my heart. I knew deep down that he was using me, but I didn't want to be alone again. I held her hand. Being alone isn't the same as being diminished. She didn't respond, but she squeezed my fingers. When move-out day finally arrived, George refused to look at me. His pride had curdled into something hollow. Not rage, impotence. He stood by the removal truck, arms crossed, face ashen. My mother hugged me, long and trembling. Is it too late? She whispered. For him? I asked. Or for us? Tears spilled down her cheeks. For us. It's never too late for us. George climbed into the passenger seat of the truck without saying goodbye. The engine started. They pulled away. And just like that, the house exhaled. The silence left behind wasn't empty. It was clean. After they moved out, the house felt both familiar and foreign. The layout was the same, but the emotional energy had shifted. It no longer felt tense or contested. It felt mine. Not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of belonging. My first night there, I walked through every room slowly, touching walls, opening cupboards, letting memories rise and settle. Childhood laughter in the backyard. My father reading the newspaper at the dining table. My mother humming while folding laundry. The house remembered me. And I remembered myself. My mother stayed with George for another 2 months. She tried to make it work, to rebuild something frayed beyond repair. But once the imbalance is exposed, it cannot easily be forgotten. She saw him clearly for the first time. Not as a partner, but as a man who thrived on her uncertainty. One afternoon, she knocked on my door holding a single suitcase. "I'm done," she said simply. She moved into my guest room that evening. Not permanently, she wanted her own independence. But temporarily, while she sorted her finances, consulted an advisor, and slowly untangled the emotional knots he'd tied over the years. We cooked together, talked, rediscovered the ease we once had. Each day she softened, recentered, reclaimed herself. As for George, I heard from him only once. A short, clipped message delivered through their mediator. "She's leaving." I replied with equal simplicity. She deserves stability. There was no rebuttal. Meanwhile, I made thoughtful updates to the house. Restored the garden beds my father once tended. Repainted the kitchen in soft cream. Replaced fixtures that had been chosen for trend rather than warmth. My mother often stood in the doorway watching me work. "You brought the house back to life," she said one evening. "No," I replied gently. "I just let it breathe again." One day, while sorting old drawers, I found something unexpected. A handwritten note from my father tucked behind an old photograph. It read, "Take care of each other. Houses endure, but families are sacred." The timing felt almost mystical. And in that moment, I forgave my mother, not for the betrayal itself, but for being human in a moment of weakness. Forgiveness, I learned, is its own form of restoration. If there is one truth I've learned in my 62 years, it is this. Revenge built on anger collapses. Revenge built on truth endures. But I never sought revenge, not in the dramatic sense people imagine. I wanted restoration, balance, accountability. And in pursuing those, I found something far more powerful than triumph. Peace. People often talk about equality as if it's a slogan, something that can be declared into existence. But equality has never been about sharing space. It's about respecting boundaries, history, and contributions. George weaponized equality to blur responsibility, to justify taking what wasn't his, to elevate his comfort over fairness. But real equality demands honesty, and accountability, and clarity. It requires each person to carry their own weight. When he said, "We're all equal now," he meant, "I should have access to what you built." But when I said it, when I finally spoke the phrase back to him, I meant something deeper. "You will stand on your own, as I have always stood on mine." My mother has begun rebuilding her life. Slowly, thoughtfully, with a gentleness she once reserved for others, but now allows herself. And the house, our house, stands as a testament to one simple, unshakable truth. Restoring what is yours is not cruelty. Protecting what remains is not selfishness. Setting boundaries is not aggression. It is dignity. If you, listening to this story, have ever been manipulated by someone who wrapped control in the language of fairness, if you've ever been told that wanting clarity makes you difficult, if you've ever felt wronged but doubted your right to act, let this serve as your reminder. You are allowed to reclaim what was taken. You are allowed to question what feels off. You are allowed to make choices that honor your peace. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "Not anymore. No further. This ends here." And sometimes that whisper is powerful enough to change everything.